My name is Diana Wright, and at 32, I thought I understood the rhythm of Silverbrook Regional Hospital. As the lead financial analyst for our 400-bed facility in Metallic Heights, Nevada, I'd spent 6 years navigating the complex world of healthcare economics, insurance claims, and budget allocations. The desert mountains surrounding our city created a natural barrier that made our hospital the primary medical center for 3 counties, and with that responsibility came intricate financial pressures I'd grown accustomed to managing. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in March, buried in a routine quarterly audit of our critical care department's supply expenditures. The numbers didn't align, not dramatically, but enough to catch my attention. Emergency medication orders had spiked by 37% over the previous 6 months, yet our patient census remained relatively stable. In healthcare finance, unexplained variances always deserve investigation. Michael Chen, our chief financial officer, had assigned me to review departmental spending patterns as part of our annual cost reduction initiative. What should have been straightforward analysis became increasingly puzzling as I dug deeper into the data. The critical care unit, managed by Catherine Morrison, showed consistent patterns of last-minute supply orders, overtime authorizations, and emergency staffing calls that seemed to cluster around specific shifts. Catherine had been with Silverbrook for 8 years, longer than my tenure, and had built a reputation as someone who could handle any crisis. She controlled access to specialty training and certification opportunities, often recommending which nurses could attend advanced cardiac life support courses or pursue critical care certifications. Her recommendations carried significant weight with administration, and she'd become the unofficial gatekeeper for professional advancement in our department. The Epic electronic health record system showed a concerning pattern when I cross-referenced timestamps. Emergency situations requiring additional staffing and resources seemed to occur with unusual frequency during Catherine's shifts, particularly when she was working with newer nurses or when department supervisors were off duty. Each incident was well documented, professionally handled, and resulted in positive patient outcomes, which made questioning them feel almost inappropriate. But the financial impact was undeniable. Overtime costs in critical care had increased by 42%, and our emergency supply budget was consistently over target. When I mentioned these observations to Amanda Foster, our director of nursing, she seemed genuinely surprised but attributed the increases to the complexity of cases we'd been receiving from rural hospitals in our network. This settled deeper when I noticed how Catherine's incident reports always painted her as the decisive factor in positive outcomes. She had a remarkable ability to anticipate problems, often calling for additional resources or backup staff just before situations became critical. Her colleagues spoke of her almost mystical intuition about patient care, and administration had begun using her success stories in recruitment materials. Yet something felt orchestrated about the timing, the frequency, the perfect resolution of each crisis. As I prepared my preliminary findings for Michael's review, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at the carefully constructed facade of someone who had learned to manipulate the very systems designed to protect our patients and our institution. The silence in my office felt heavy as I stared at the spreadsheets, knowing that tomorrow's meeting would either validate my concerns or reveal them as the paranoid suspicions of an overworked analyst. Either way, I was about to discover just how deep the deception ran. The meeting with Michael Wright took place in his corner office overlooking the employee parking lot, where the morning shift was arriving under gray Nevada skies. I spread my analysis across his mahogany desk, watching his expression shift from casual interest to focused concern as he absorbed the data patterns I'd uncovered. "Bethany, this is thorough work," he said, adjusting his reading glasses. "But Catherine Morrison has been with us for 8 years. She's one of our most respected critical care nurses." "I understand that, Michael. But look at these overtime patterns." I pointed to the highlighted sections of my report. Emergency situations requiring additional staffing occur 63% more frequently during her shifts compared to other nurses with similar experience levels. Michael leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. "Patient acuity varies. Some nurses naturally draw more complex cases. That's what I thought initially. But when I cross-referenced with patient admission diagnoses and severity scores, the correlation doesn't hold. The emergencies aren't related to initial patient complexity. They develop during Catherine's care." The silence stretched between us as Michael studied the financial projections. Our critical care overtime budget was projected to exceed allocation by nearly $200,000 if current trends continued. For a regional hospital like Silverbrook, that represented a significant strain on resources. "What are you suggesting?" he asked finally. "I'm not suggesting anything yet, but I think we need to look deeper into the specific incidents. Review the circumstances, the timing, the outcomes." Michael nodded slowly. "I'll need to involve Diana Patterson from Risk Management. This kind of investigation requires proper protocols." Over the following weeks, I found myself observing Catherine's work with new eyes. She moved through the critical care unit with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Her interactions with patients and families warm and professional. Colleagues sought her advice on complex cases, and she mentored newer nurses with patience and skill. But I began noticing subtleties that hadn't registered before. How Catherine often volunteered for the most challenging patient assignments. How she had a remarkable ability to identify potential complications before they became apparent to others. How her documentation was always impeccable, creating clear paper trails that supported her clinical decisions. The breakthrough came during a particularly busy Thursday evening shift. I was reviewing supply utilization reports in my office when the overhead page echoed through the hospital. Code Blue, Critical Care Unit, Room 314. Code Blue, Critical Care Unit, Room 314. I watched through my window as the response team rushed toward the elevator. Within minutes, the all-clear came through the system. Another successful resuscitation. Another crisis averted through quick thinking and skilled intervention. The incident report, filed by Catherine Morrison, detailed how she had noticed subtle changes in the patient's cardiac rhythm during routine monitoring. Her early intervention and immediate call for the code team had prevented what could have been a serious cardiac event. The patient recovered fully, the family expressed gratitude, and administration praised the exemplary care. But something nagged at me about the timing. I accessed the Epic system and pulled the patient's complete record, cross-referencing medication administration times with Catherine's documentation. The cardiac monitor strips showed the rhythm changes Catherine had noted, but when I looked at the medication administration record, I found something troubling. The patient had received a dose of potassium chloride 30 minutes before the cardiac irregularities began. The dose was within normal parameters, properly ordered and documented. But the timing struck me as significant. Potassium affects cardiac rhythm, and while the dose was therapeutic, the timing of its administration in relation to the subsequent emergency seemed more than coincidental. I spent the weekend reviewing similar incidents from the past 6 months, looking for patterns in medication timing and emergency responses. What I found made my hand shake as I typed my supplemental report. In 12 separate incidents involving Catherine Morrison, patients had received medications that could potentially cause the exact complications that subsequently required emergency intervention. The medications were always properly ordered, correctly dosed, and appropriately documented. But the timing created windows of vulnerability that Catherine seemed uniquely positioned to recognize and address. The pattern was subtle enough to escape routine review, but consistent enough to suggest intentionality. Catherine wasn't harming patients, quite the opposite. She was creating situations where her expertise became essential, where her quick thinking saved the day, where her value to the hospital became undeniable. Monday morning brought another meeting with Michael Wright, this time with Diana Patterson present. Diana's background in risk management meant she approached the data with clinical skepticism, but even she couldn't dismiss the statistical improbability of the patterns I'd identified. "If your analysis is correct," Diana said carefully, "Catherine is manipulating medication timing to create emergencies she can then resolve. It's a form of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, but in a professional context." Michael rubbed his temples. "The liability implications alone." "It's more than liability," I said. "She's been controlling access to specialty training and certification opportunities by positioning herself as indispensable. Newer nurses don't get the same development opportunities because Catherine's crisis management skills make her the go-to person for complex cases." Diana made notes in her tablet. "We need to involve human resources and potentially external investigators. This level of misconduct requires careful handling." The investigation that followed was conducted with the discretion that hospital politics demanded. Catherine continued her regular duties while investigators quietly reviewed her cases, interviewed colleagues, and analyzed the financial impact of her actions. To outside observers, nothing had changed in the critical care unit, but I felt the weight of knowledge every time I saw Catherine in the hallways. She greeted me with the same professional warmth she'd always shown, discussed patient care issues with her usual competence, and continued to receive praise from supervisors and colleagues who remained unaware of the investigation. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Amanda Foster, reviewing staffing patterns for budget planning, noticed that Catherine had been systematically requesting shifts that coincided with newer nurses' rotations and supervisor absences. The pattern suggested deliberate timing designed to maximize her opportunities to demonstrate indispensability while minimizing oversight. When confronted with the during a formal interview, Catherine's response was measured and professional. She didn't deny the patterns but framed them as conscientious patient advocacy and clinical excellence. Her documentation was flawless, her patient outcomes exemplary, and her intentions, she claimed, were always focused on providing the best possible care. But the investigation had revealed the calculated nature of her actions. She had created false emergency situations to demonstrate her indispensability, manipulating both patient care and hospital resources for personal advancement. The betrayal cut deep because it had been wrapped in the language of clinical excellence and patient advocacy. As I prepared my final report, I realized that Catherine's greatest skill hadn't been clinical expertise. It had been the ability to make her manipulation look like exceptional nursing care. She had turned the trust inherent in healthcare relationships into a tool for personal gain, and the discovery of that betrayal would reshape how our hospital approached oversight and accountability. The more was overwhelming, the pattern undeniable, and the consequences about to unfold in ways that would test every relationship and system within Silverbrook Regional Hospital. The formal hearing took place in Conference Room B, a sterile space that had witnessed countless administrative decisions, but never one quite like this. I sat across from Catherine Wright, watching her maintain the same composed demeanor that had made her so effective at concealing her actions. Hospital Administrator Diana Chen presided over the proceedings, flanked by representatives from Human Resources and Risk Management. Catherine's defense was methodical and professional. She presented each incident as a legitimate clinical response, supported by documentation that appeared flawless on the surface. Her voice remained steady as she explained her decision-making processes, her commitment to patient safety, and her dedication to maintaining the highest standards of care. The patterns identified in this investigation, she stated, reflect my proactive approach to patient advocacy and my willingness to step in when situations require immediate attention. I've never compromised patient care for personal gain. But Amanda Foster's analysis had revealed the mathematical precision behind Catherine's actions, the timing of her interventions, the selection of specific patients, and the coordination with staffing schedules showed a level of calculation that went far beyond clinical instinct. During a brief recess, Amanda approached me in the hallway. "The documentation review is complete," she said quietly. Every incident she created required additional resources, overtime staffing, and emergency protocols. The financial impact is significant, but the trust violation is what really matters. When the hearing resumed, the presentation began in earnest. The investigation had uncovered a pattern spanning 18 months, involving dozens of manufactured emergencies and systematic manipulation of hospital resources. Catherine had identified vulnerabilities in our oversight systems and exploited them with surgical precision. Her response to each piece was carefully crafted. She acknowledged the patterns but maintained that her actions were driven by clinical judgment and patient advocacy. Her documentation supported her claims, her patient outcomes were exemplary, and her professional reputation remained intact among colleagues who hadn't been part of the investigation. The most damaging came from the electronic health records analysis. Catherine had accessed patient files outside her assigned cases, reviewed staffing schedules before selecting targets for her interventions, and coordinated her actions with periods of reduced supervision. The digital trail revealed the premeditated nature of her deception. These access patterns, Diana Chen observed, suggest a level of planning inconsistent with emergency clinical responses. Catherine's explanation was measured and professional. Comprehensive patient care requires understanding the broader clinical picture. My access to these records was always within policy guidelines and focused on ensuring optimal outcomes. But the investigation had revealed something more troubling than policy violations. Catherine had weaponized the trust inherent in healthcare relationships, using patient care as cover for personal advancement. She had turned clinical excellence into a tool for manipulation, making her betrayal almost impossible to detect. The hearing extended into the afternoon as each piece was presented and challenged. Catherine's responses remained consistent and professional, but the cumulative weight of the investigation was undeniable. She had created false emergency situations to demonstrate her indispensability, manipulating both patient care and hospital resources for personal gain. Amanda's support throughout the process had been invaluable. She had provided the analytical framework that revealed the patterns, offered perspective during difficult moments, and helped maintain focus on the broader implications for patient safety and institutional integrity. As the formal proceedings concluded, Diana Chen announced that Catherine would be placed on administrative leave pending final review. The decision would be made within 72 hours, based on the presented and the recommendations of the investigation team. Catherine's response was characteristically professional. She expressed disappointment with the decision, but stated her intention to cooperate fully with any additional review processes. Her composure never wavered, even as the implications of the investigation became clear. Walking back to my office, I felt the weight of what had transpired. The investigation had revealed a betrayal that struck at the heart of healthcare relationships, the trust between colleagues, the integrity of patient care, and the ethical foundations of our profession. Amanda joined me for coffee in the hospital cafeteria, where we discussed the broader implications of the case. The system's changes will be significant, she noted. Enhanced oversight protocols, modified access controls, and additional training requirements. This investigation will reshape how we approach accountability. The next 72 hours passed with unusual throughout the hospital. Catherine's absence was noticeable, but not disruptive, a testament to the hospital's resilience and the competence of the remaining staff. Colleagues who had worked closely with her expressed shock and disappointment, struggling to reconcile the poor personnel with their professional experiences. The final decision came on a Friday afternoon. Diana Chen called me to her office to discuss the outcome before the official announcement. Catherine Wright's employment had been terminated, effective immediately. The of systematic manipulation and resource misuse had been deemed incompatible with continued employment in healthcare. The investigation revealed a pattern of behavior that violated fundamental principles of patient care and professional integrity, Diana explained. While her clinical skills were exemplary, the calculated nature of her actions represents a betrayal of trust that cannot be overlooked. The announcement was made through official channels, with careful attention to privacy requirements and professional protocols. Catherine's termination was attributed to policy violations and professional misconduct, without detailed disclosure of the investigation findings. As news of the decision spread through the hospital, reactions varied among staff members. Some expressed shock and disbelief. Others acknowledged that they had noticed unusual patterns but hadn't connected them to systematic manipulation. The revelation forced everyone to reconsider their assumptions about professional relationships and institutional oversight. Amanda's role in uncovering the truth earned recognition from hospital administration, though she remained characteristically modest about her contributions. The patterns were there, she said. It just required the right analytical approach to make them visible. The aftermath of Catherine's termination brought both relief and reflection. The investigation had revealed vulnerabilities in our systems that required immediate attention, but it had also demonstrated the hospital's commitment to accountability and patient safety. Standing in the ICU where Catherine had orchestrated many of her manufactured emergencies, I watched the evening shift begin their routines with renewed awareness of the trust inherent in their work. The betrayal had been exposed, justice had been served, and the healing process could finally begin. 12 months later, I stood in the conference room at Mountain View Medical Center, watching 20 healthcare professionals take notes as I concluded my presentation on preventing abuse of authority in healthcare settings. The workshop had become a quarterly requirement across the hospital system, born from lessons learned at Silverbrook Regional. The key indicators aren't always obvious, I explained, advancing to the final slide. Pattern recognition requires systematic documentation and collaborative observation. Trust your instincts, but verify with data. A nurse from the cardiac unit raised her hand. How do you balance healthy skepticism with necessary teamwork? Professional vigilance doesn't mean paranoia, I replied. It means maintaining awareness of systemic vulnerabilities while fostering genuine collaboration. The goal is protection, not suspicion. After the session, I walked through Mountain View's corridors, noting the familiar rhythms of hospital life. The transition from Silverbrook had been gradual but necessary. While the investigations had vindicated my concerns, the emotional weight of betrayal had required distance for proper healing. My new role as Quality Assurance Director allowed me to implement systemic safeguards across multiple facilities. The position combined clinical oversight with educational responsibilities, creating frameworks to prevent the manipulation Catherine had perfected. Amanda had also moved, accepting a research position at the State Medical Board. Her analytical skills now contributed to policy development and regulatory oversight. We maintained contact, sharing insights about institutional accountability and professional ethics. The workshops I developed drew from real experiences without compromising confidentiality. Healthcare professionals learned to recognize manufactured urgency, document unusual patterns, and report concerns through appropriate channels. The curriculum emphasized that protecting patients sometimes meant questioning colleagues. Silverbrook Regional had implemented new protocols following the investigation. Emergency response procedures now included additional verification steps, resource allocation required supervisory approval, and staff scheduling incorporated rotation requirements to prevent excessive influence concentration. Catherine's case had become a cautionary study in professional misconduct, referenced in ethics courses and administrative training programs. Her termination served as a reminder that clinical competence couldn't excuse systematic manipulation or resource abuse. The betrayal had taught me that institutional trust required constant maintenance. Professional relationships needed boundaries, oversight systems demanded regular evaluation, and individual accountability remained paramount regardless of reputation or tenure. Standing in my office that evening, reviewing feedback from the day's workshop, I felt the satisfaction of meaningful work. The participants had engaged thoughtfully with difficult concepts, asking questions that demonstrated genuine commitment to ethical practice. The sunset painted Mountain View's windows in warm light, creating patterns that shifted with the days. The hospital's evening routines began around me, carried out by professionals who understood their responsibilities to patients and colleagues alike. My phone buzzed with a message from Amanda. Saw your workshop evaluation scores. Impressive impact metrics. Coffee next week? I smiled, typing back confirmation. The friendship forged through adversity had evolved into ongoing collaboration, proof that crisis could strengthen rather than destroy professional relationships when built on genuine trust. The investigations had brought justice, but the real victory lay in systemic improvements that protected future patients and staff. Catherine's manipulation had exposed vulnerabilities that now strengthened institutional safeguards across the healthcare network. Gathering my materials, I prepared to leave for the day. The workshops would continue, the protocols would evolve, and the vigilance would persist. The betrayal at Silverbrook had ended, but its lessons lived on in every professional who learned to balance trust with accountability. Walking toward the parking garage, I reflected on the journey, from suspicion to revelation to resolution. The silence that had once felt ominous now represented peace earned through persistence and courage to confront uncomfortable truths. It was finally over, and the silence felt earned.